welcome to my educational channel. I am Dr. Jennifer Mata. Today's video is going to be about educational models. In this video, I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint presentation that I designed for my students to better explain to them what educational models are and all the key elements and components that it entails. So let's get started. An educational model is an ideology of what the teaching and learning process entails. It is sometimes also called an approach or a program. Yet an educational model, instead of an approach or a program, is a broader, more encompassing term. Educational models support themselves or stem from the values and beliefs they have coming from the field of philosophy. An educational model will have a solid understanding of what they believe or what it believes the nature of children is. We can see differences in educational models that feel or believe that the children are essentially good versus those that are founded on the belief that children are essentially evil. Traditional educational models back in the 1800s thought that children were essentially evil and needed good to be reinstituted in them. So the nature or the purpose of education was to instill this goodness back into the child, versus educational models that believe that the child is in essence good will be models that will allow the child to flourish and develop their goodness, supported by the environment and the teachers around them. So these two beliefs are at the core of what the educational model stands for, and they're very, very opposite, different kinds of beliefs. So we see that education borrows from philosophy in terms of establishing the beliefs and the values that the educational modeler has. But it also borrows from the field of psychology. And from the field of psychology, we have numerous developmental theories and theories of how teaching and learning occurs that psychologists have researched and have published and shared with educators. So as educators, we borrow from this field as well. An educational model will hold a very clear understanding of what kind of developmental theory it believes in and thus supports. How does the teaching and learning process occur? Who is the responsible for the, say, transmission of the learning or the receptivity of the learning? This comes from psychology, and it comes from research done with teachers and educators, but also research done to find what are the best ways in which we learn. And if we're talking about early childhood education, we're talking about what are the best ways in which children learn. So one theory that is very predominant and common these days in early childhood education is Constructivism. And the Constructivist theory supports the notion that children learn by doing, learn by hands-on experiences. So an educational model that supports or believes in this constructivist approach to teaching and learning will have that very much embedded in their theory and in their different components and elements of the model. Okay, so we've seen that educational models support themselves in their beliefs and values stemming from the area of philosophy in terms of the nature of children, and then it also borrows from the field of psychology, identifying specific developmental theories and theories of teaching and learning in which it supports itself. everything that then materializes in the process of teaching and learning needs to be very much anchored in those philosophical and psychological tenets that support the educational model. So we're going to talk now about different aspects that compose educational models, and we're going to identify them in a linear fashion, but that doesn't mean that they present themselves in this order or that some of them are more important than others. They're all components and aspects that can be found in educational models. The first one we're going to talk about is the learning environment. And the learning environment is the space in which the teaching and learning process occurs. And it's going to be composed by the equipment and materials that we can find in that space. The equipment constitutes the furniture, the organization of the furniture, the aesthetics of the classroom, the space in which the classroom is located and how the classroom is organized. The materials have to do with the actual objects that the teacher is going to use in order to facilitate the learning process, and that the teachers are going to, and that the children are going to manipulate and use in order to best learn. So equipment and materials can both fall under this learning environment umbrella. Another important aspect that is found in educational model is the clear establishment of the daily schedule or the class routine. And this is where you're going to find how much time is allocated for which kinds of activities. First, you're going to see what kinds of activities have been incorporated in the daily schedule. So what are children and teachers dedicating their time to? But then also you're going to see the range of time. So how much time is going to be dedicated to which types of activities? And this all goes back to those developmental theories and understandings of teaching and learning. For example, and going back to that example of the constructivist approach, if our educational model stems from an understanding of constructivist learning, we're going to have a lot of time allocated for free exploration, for hands-on manipulation of children or students with the materials, without much of teacher lecturing or teacher directiveness. The bulk of the day, the amount of time that is dedicated in the day to these types of activities under this type of theory is going to be the majority of the day, versus an educational model that does not believe that children learn this way will have a class schedule that looks very differently, because it will not necessarily allocate enough time or this amount of time to having children explore freely with the materials. So the daily schedule and the class routine, how the class schedule or day progresses, is going to depend very much upon those philosophical aspects of understanding of the nature of children and how do children best learn. Okay, so we've gotten to the element or the component of educational models that folks are most familiar with, which is curriculum and pedagogy. So when we're talking about curriculum, we're talking about the totality of student experiences that occur in the educational process. The term curriculum often refers to the specifically planned sequence of instruction, or to a view of the students' experiences in terms of the educators or school's instructional goals. So the instructional goals are going to guide the content in the instruction, the sequence in the instruction, and then the totality of the experiences that the children or the students have within a learning environment. So that's the curriculum. There's many definitions for curriculum, and one of them encompasses everything that happens in the learning and teaching experiences. But with this definition that I just gave you, it helps us narrow it down to content, to sequence, and to experiences and activities that occur in this educational process so that learning can not only occur, but can occur in order to reach the instructional goals and the learning objectives. So it's sort of outcome driven. Regardless of the developmental theory or the nature of children, sort of that the educational model stems from. So we're going to see that under curriculum and pedagogy, we have standards, we have learning objectives, we have activities, we have experiences, lessons and lesson plans, we have strategies, we have techniques, and then finally we have assessment. All of these are components that are going to be part of the curriculum. So a good solid curriculum will have all of these integrated, delineated, highlighted for teachers. There are different kinds of curriculum, though, which we're going to see in a minute, but I want to touch upon pedagogy as the art of teaching. Some define pedagogy, but others define pedagogy as the actual process of teaching and learning and all the strategies that come into play when you're trying to help students learn and achieve those outcomes that we were talking about before. So that's why they go hand in hand, curriculum and pedagogy, because both of them are going to be defined towards these experiences that occur, that are facilitated in the educational process. So some examples of curriculum are umbrella curriculum, which is the definition of curriculum that I mentioned as an example before, which is the overarching everything that happens under this broader umbrella during the educational experiences or the learning teaching process. So some view it as that, everything that occurs in the school environment or the learning environment. Another type of curriculum is a program, approach, or model-based curriculum. And in this case, we have, for example, the HighScope curriculum that represents clearly the HighScope approach to education. That would be an example of it. Another would be a program. For example, the Head Start program is a program-based curriculum. The Montessori Model or the Montessori approaches is another approach-based curriculum. There are other curriculum that are commercial or packaged based, and these are those that are written by a curricular developer, and they are facilitated then to the teacher to be enacted in the classroom. An example of this is the creative curriculum, which is widely used nowadays in preschool. The creative curriculum delineates what the teacher should be doing, the standards are identified, the learning objectives, the activities and the lesson plans are there, the strategies are identified, even the materials, the books have been selected for the teachers to read and use. Some commercial packaged curricula are really good at providing also assessment tools for teachers, but most of them are lacking in this area. So they have a rich array of activities and lesson plans and perhaps strategies and techniques to be used for the particular content area or for the particular age group that they have been designed for, but they lack in assessment tools. So it's very difficult for the teacher to establish then the impact of the teaching on the students or the outcome of the learning that the students are having. So then we have the planned or teacher design curriculum. And within this type of curriculum, which is not now designed by a curriculum designer, but it's designed by the teacher, can be either child-centered curriculum or it can be an emergent kind of curriculum. The child-centered curriculum is going to be a developmentally appropriate curriculum that was based on the teacher's knowledge of development and knowing that if, for example, she is working with 3 and 4-year-olds, what are 3 and 4-year-olds capable of doing in all the different areas of development, and where should they be in terms of development in all these different areas, and where are they heading toward. And so what can the teacher do in terms of activities and experiences provided for these 3 and 4-year-olds in order to help them move from the stage in which they're at to the following stage, or the stage that comes next for them in terms of development. So that would be a child-centered curriculum where the teacher is focused on the aspects of development that are best for the children and the age of the children that she's working with. Another component of child-centered curriculum is individualization. So knowing the children that you're working with particularly, and these children are going to change from year to year. So even if you continue being a preschool teacher working with 3 and 4-year-olds, the children that you're working with are going to change. And a child-centered curriculum is going to be very much focused on the particular children that you have in your classroom, their particular interests and their particular needs. Lastly, an emergent curriculum is a curriculum that is going to come or stem from the needs of the children primarily. So this was also designed by the teacher, but it's going to be addressing the children's interests and the children's needs. So for example, if you have a group of children that is very much interested in trains and is very excited about learning about trains and reading about trains and visiting and going to see trains, the teacher is probably, if she's operating under an emergent curriculum approach, she's going to create a curriculum that is going to cater to these interests that the children have, and is going to take the children to a train station, is going to incorporate a lot of books and materials that have to do with trains. It's going to have trains in the block area. It's going to have train and train conductor attire in the dress up area. It's going to have books about trains in the library. It's going to have all these resources available to help the children continue to explore and continue to deepen their knowledge of this particular topic that they're so passionate about. So the emergent curriculum is driven by the child. It's still designed and developed by the teacher, but in response to the children's interests and needs. So the last component or aspect within an educational model has to do with the people that are involved. So the teacher and the student, what are each of these folks' role, and what are the types of interactions and relationships that we can expect from this particular educational model. So is the teacher a directive kind of teacher? Is the teacher a constructive kind of teacher? Is the teacher a mediator? Is the teacher the responsible and the holder of the knowledge and thus the transmitter of the knowledge? Or is a teacher just a facilitator, a mediator of the learning experience for the student? So determining the roles is going to be very important, because then the interactions that are going to occur and the types of relationships that are going to be forming within the learning teaching process or experiences are going to stem from what the teacher believes and understands her role to be versus what the student thus believes what his or her role might be. So these roles that have been identified are going to be very determining for the planning. And the planning is usually the responsibility of the teacher in most educational models. But in some educational models, the planning comes from the children. If we look at those child-centered curricula, are going to have a planning situation in which the children are going to come up with what they're going to do. If not for the entirety of the day, for a certain portion of the day. For example, in the HighScope educational model, there's a plan do review component that is the core, the heart of HighScope. And in this case, the child is the planner of what he or she is going to do for an X period of time. Usually the daily schedule for the HighScope educational model is going to allow for an hour or more of free open play where the child can plan what they're going to do, go and do it, interact with the materials and do and carry out the plan, and then come back and in a small group or large group setting review what he or she did, and then reflect upon if the plan was carried out or if the plan might continue, say, tomorrow or in the next open-ended free play period of the daily schedule. But usually the planning is in the hands of the teacher, and in educational models in which that is the case, and even in the HighScope model, a lot of the planning also falls under the responsibility of the teacher. And in the planning, we're looking at bringing together everything that the educational model stands for in terms of, again, the nature of the child and the beliefs and values of what is important for teaching and learning, and then the theories of how to best teach and how to best learn, and the theories of development, which tell us where the child is at a certain age in the span of their development. So, in talking about planning as the process of thinking about and organizing the activities required to achieve a desired instructional goal, we find that the teacher will need to know three core pieces of knowledge. First, the teacher needs to know the content, what is going to be taught. So, if the lesson is on math, the teacher needs to be knowledgeable on the specific content, concepts that are going to be facilitated within that lesson. A second body of knowledge that the teacher needs to be very savvy and knowledgeable about is child development. So the teacher needs to know exactly where the child is in terms of development, which area of development is going to be addressed in that particular learning experience, where the child is, and what is the target for the child to move toward during that lesson in terms of development. The third body of knowledge, and the last one, is the requirements of that particular grade. So again, if we are teaching preschool, as we used as an example before, the teacher needs to know what are the requirements for that grade level. What is the content that the children need to be focusing on? What are the skills that the children need to be developing? What are the attitudes and behaviors that the children need to be advancing towards and enacting for that particular grade level? Currently, we have in the US the Common Core state standards. The majority of the states in the US use the Common Core, and what these guidelines or standards tell us is what are the particular requirements in terms of content, skills, and behaviors in each of the grade levels. So if you, regardless of which grade you're teaching, you're going to be guided by the standards that your students are going to need to meet in that particular grade. So having these three bodies of knowledge, content, development, and grade requirements or standards, is going to help you best plan for the children that you're teaching. But again, we went from the macro of the educational model and where it comes from to the micro, what happens at a micro level in the classroom between the interactions of the teacher and the children, or the teacher and the students specifically. So I'm hoping that this will give you a broad idea of what an educational model is. There are many examples of models and approaches. I named a few, but there are the Montessori model, the Waldorf model, the Reggio Emilia model, and some of them are more known in the US than others. But in the US, we also have the HighScope model, and we have Head Start as a program that is a federally funded national program in the US. And my goal is to create videos specifically for each of these, explaining what they are so that you can understand what the differences among them might be. But they all have an explanation of what their learning environment looks like, what their daily schedule looks like, what their curriculum and their pedagogy looks like, what the roles and the interactions and relationships between the teachers and the students look like, and then what the planning and the actual lessons and experience in the classroom look like, as well as then how do the teachers assess and know if the learning is happening and how well is it happening for the children. So that's it for our explanation of educational models. If you have any questions, please post them on the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for notifications on future videos to come. Thank you. See you again next week.